there have been studies in which groups of people have done exactly that. That they've, in a playful way, they've created a spirit, a ghost. Okay, and there have been a number of researchers who have actually had long-term, what they call them, sitter groups. It's basically a seance, but there's no medium. You, as a group, become all the communal networked medium. You all work together as a group. And there are some details about how to go about it. It's very simple. But the net result is that they've been able to create an entity that will tap on the table intelligently, will answer questions, will have a personality, will be humorous, or will be nasty, or will be describing herself or himself as tall or short or blonde hair or brown hair, or the entity will create itself. Okay?
And I want to ask you, when you say that it answers questions or has the ability to describe itself as one way or the other, in what way does it communicate? Through like a spirit board or verbally?
Yeah. What the best way to describe this is to picture Ouija boards. Remember Ouija boards?
Oh yeah.
Okay, and still people they still do them, and people use them. A number of people have sworn off Ouija boards because it was so real. They got together with some friends in the bedroom late at night, and let's ask questions on the Ouija board. And everyone thinks, it's not me pushing the planchette. It must be you, No, it's not me. I didn't push the planchette. So these things can become real, and it takes on a life of its own. And they're amazingly real. Yeah. Sometimes they can even shut out the lights, and people claim that they can actually see, after the personality is fully developed of this. So that's an example in a laboratory that's done, with cameras watching and recorded and published in scientific journals, the results of these things. And so we're talking about a real effect. This is something real that happens. Now, some people get scared of this. Some people are kind of like the people who do Ouija boards, and then they swear off them forever because it was too real. And I can understand that. Anything we don't understand that's happening to us is scary. That's if our minds cannot make sense of it in the way our mind wants to do, our mind is controlling my universe. And if it comes across something that it doesn't know what to do with, it will become confused, possibly angry, possibly frightened. And that's exactly what happens in a RSPK case.
So, just to clarify, when you're saying that they take on a life of their own and this activity starts to happen, you mean that it could start off with somebody saying, okay, I'm doing the knocking. I'm just goofing around. Okay, you caught me. But at some point, you're saying that it actually happens on its own. It's now anomalous.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
So what do you interpret that to be at that point? Do you think that's human beings conjuring something, or do you think it's literally creating something? And by conjuring, I would mean like a spirit, some type of deity, or something of that nature, or do you think it's actually creating something that didn't exist before, but now truly does?
So in one sense, you're creating an entity, because the entity is in the minds of all the sitters who are sitting around the room. And if you're part of that group, you will have that basic belief, and you will see the entity that you've created as being truly real. Other people who are biologists, or medical doctors would say, Now, that's not real to me.
Right.
Yeah. But so it depends what sense the word real is. But for the group sitter, yeah, it's the entity that's created. And I use the word created. Yeah. This is that's the best word for it.
How would you explain that activity? Do you just think that's the energy from the people somehow that are creating that? Or when people, quote unquote, manifest this type of thing, that it truly now has some type of intelligence of its own to do what it wants to at will? As
a scientist, okay, so now we've talked about this, and we say we can do in science, we can create this entity, and we can discuss it, but that's where we get to the edge of science. We're at the leading edge now. And what's next? Can the entity go off on its own and haunt a house someplace?
Right.
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm still stuck with the entity right here at the table, and I can make measurements. And as far as I know, when the group goes home, says goodnight, goes home, the entity is no more. And then they come back a week later, and they sit at the same table, and they say, well, I wonder how Philip is tonight, And they start their seance, and they meditate, hold hands, do whatever they do. And knocking comes, and Philip comes and answers their questions. And so that's all I know. All I know is facts. So what happens next is interesting speculation.
Yeah, it's subjective, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on one's belief system. Needless to say, in a lot of religions, if you're communicating with spirits, so to speak, or what people would perceive to be a spirit that could only be evil, some people would see it as the soul of a loved one or some type of guardian angel, and then some people would just purely look at it as some type of displaced energy of some sorts in a scientific way that we just don't understand yet about our abilities.
Exactly. And in all this, we must remember, we must constantly remember that these things are not without risk. That is, some people get so involved with them that they go off the deep end and they end up in a mental institution someplace because they can't take it. And it has happened. There have been a number of people who came to the parapsychology laboratory to be tested for ESP. And so they were tested, and they did well. They got a good score. So the researchers said, well, thanks for participating in this study, and your score was very good, which means, and he would try to explain, well, this means that you seem to have some native ability at telepathy. And say goodbye, thank you very much, see you later. The guy walks out the street, and before he gets to the end of the street, he starts seeing people coming at him. If I can read their mind, they can read my mind. Oh my God. And he freaks out, and they have to chase him down on campus by the campus police, and then they hold him down and they commit him to the mental institution in North Carolina. That happened. Okay. Why did it happen? It wasn't because of the ESP, in my opinion. It was because he was on the edge anyway. And that was the conclusion of the consulting physician, a psychiatrist who actually saw him and treated him at the center, that we didn't have to worry. It wasn't our fault.
Right.
That guy was on the edge. He had a long history of such experiences. So, but this is not without, we need to think about this, and be careful we're not. So the Hindus have a word called siddhis, S-I-D-H-I-E-S, siddhis, for powers. And they say that when you meditate, you will likely encounter, if you meditate regularly every day and longer, reach toward your spiritual enlightenment, you will automatically encounter in yourself siddhis. You will experience powers. and they say, stay away. When you encounter powers, when your mind clears, you can see somebody else's thoughts, stay away. Get out of there. That's their sage advice. And it is sage advice because it will distract you from what you're really here for. Yeah. What you're here for is to find out who you are, Right. Not to find out how you can influence somebody else's mind.
Right. Well, that's a dangerous thing right there. Yes. It's also interesting talking to you about that in terms of people that have that telekinesis ability and that they can kind of go off the deep end with it. I really believe that, because I deal obviously primarily in hauntings, not necessarily poltergeist phenomenon as a expertise, but I do see that people that are experiencing a haunting in their home will sometimes get very obsessed with the entire situation. It's on their mind, and understandably so. I mean, if you truly believe or are living in a home with some type of entity or something that is unseen, that is doing you harm or causing negative influence or really wreaking havoc on your life, some people can't do anything but focus on that at all times. And then the more that they think about it, I believe that oftentimes the more that they think about it, the more they're seeing it or think they're seeing it, even when they're not, and then it spirals out of control, and it usually reaches some type of breaking point, and that's typically when we're brought in. But then sometimes if they don't reach out for a paranormal investigator or some type of outside help, things tend to get pretty tragic in some ways.
They do, and that's definitely a risk factor that is there when people encounter unusual activity in and around their family home, for sure. And I totally agree. It's very understandable, very understandable. That's one of the more difficult things to deal with. So I had a case in Bridgeport, Connecticut case, which you pointed out had somewhat of a high profile.
Oh, yeah.
And when it occurred, had a lot of publicity because there were a lot of news people, magazine writers from New York, from Washington, from all over the place, internationally actually, who flew in immediately when they heard that because they felt it was presented as a case that was active and that you could go and bang on the door and go in. And that was kind of true. In any case, in that particular case, the activity only lasted a few days, like it normally does in a normal case. That's about a week after then I arrived. I collected a lot of reports. I did a lot of interviewing, talked with the police. I found out what's happening with the little girl, the family. And then Bill Roll came up, and Bill Roll and I met with the family. We met with the parish priest. We met with a counselor, a psychologist in the area, and we met with, there was another person, I think it was a police chief. And we made an arrangement for Marcy, the little girl, who was the agent in that particular case, to get back into her school. She had to go to public school because the family couldn't afford to pay for the Catholic school she was going to before that.
Oh, I see.
And that was it. That was the end of the case. And then I get a Christmas card every year from them.
Huh. So just getting her back into her school seemed to subside the activity.
Yes. The whole thing. That was the end of the case. Yeah. And they were delighted. The family just went on to their normal life after that. And now she didn't. She didn't because she had wanted to get out of that house anyway. But that's a separate story.
Okay.
There's I think of it as separate. And there is a connection, but in any case, so that was one of the good cases. So, meaning from my perspective, I collected information, which is valuable, made publication. It goes into the archives of another case that, on which we can build a pattern. And it helped the family. We settled the issue. We stopped it dead cold, and that was it.
And what type of things were they experiencing? I mean, from what I understand about that case, there was a pretty high volume of eyewitnesses that actually saw this anomalous force. Over 50 people.
Over 50 people. Most of them were on duty at the time. Policemen, they were firemen, there were TV reporters, journalists, radio announcers.
So these are high-profile witnesses. I mean, the fact that they're going to be very objective.
Yes.
Wow. And what were they seeing? What did they witness?
Well, they witnessed a whole bunch of stuff, but it only happened in like a couple of days. So if they got there on Sunday, they saw something. They saw the big recliner chair flip over while they're standing next to it, even leaning on it. In one case, it happened several times. They saw the TVs flip around. They saw the kitchen table jump up and down. In one case, one of the policemen went into the kitchen because there was too much. It was like a zoo in there. I mean, there were 15 people in this tiny little house in the living room, all kind of hanging around, waiting for something to happen. So one of the policemen went in. He was on duty, and he went in to the kitchen to have a smoke, and be away from the crowd, get away from the noise. And he stood there, and he was facing the refrigerator, which was against the north wall. And he was just having a cigarette, as he reported it to me, and the refrigerator lifted up very slowly, 6 inches, 4, 5, 6 inches off the ground, and then started slowly coming towards him, very slowly, non-threatening. Interesting. He wasn't threatened. He just continued having his cigarette dropped on the floor. He said he unbelievably he had no words to describe this, but he said, and then it sat down, and then it lifted up again and went back. All this happened in like 3-minute period, and he said, if I were you listening to me, I wouldn't believe me. I wouldn't believe this. He said, but I'm reported, and the chief of the police told me I have to tell you whatever I witnessed, and I have to be absolutely truthful, and that he guaranteed me that nothing would ever come of this. No one else would ever know about. This report would never get to him. It would only be used for the purposes of the Psychical Research Foundation's reports.
Wow. I mean, that's fascinating to hear that. And what's really kind of interesting to me is these reports here from, of course, the Dice Road case.
Yes.
There's very similar things that you just spoke of that happened to this family.
Yes.
And what's really interesting to me as well is that, you're saying that predominantly these poltergeist happenings usually take place in a few days, maybe a week it lingers on. That's predominantly the timeline.
That's right.
And then with the Dice Road case, that
totally different,
went on for a year plus.
Yes, yeah.
And how rare is that?
It's very rare.